Hello and welcome back. This is MC1 Gamer. I'm back with another video. I know it's been been a while, about 3 weeks or so since my last video. It's been a little bit of a tough time just because my son is going to be away for the summer, and I've been spending a lot of family time. So I've kind of been laxed in putting out a bunch of content that I still have waiting to cut and waiting to put audio on. So forgive me, but I've appeared on some other shows, the Andy and Remy show recently. Last week was Vince Ventrella and Tom's Warhammer Weekly, which is great. Just to keep out in the out in the I guess the various different Warhammer YouTuber shows. But it's this new revelation and something new that was posted just this morning by GW and had been posted by Nicholas in the Warhammer YouTubers Facebook page. Brings some interesting thoughts as far as what the General's Handbook is going to be bringing for matched play. First, let me say, you have to read this to really understand what's going on here. This is not just a throwback completely to the old way of playing Warhammer with a specific Cortex, and I'll get into this in just a second. But this is, the General's Handbook provides additional methods of play. And I have several thoughts and several viewpoints about what I think is going to happen with this handbook. And some people will agree and some people will disagree, I'm sure. But I think there's, we've seen certain patterns in the past of how people are going to be conforming or deferring or even imposing specific types of play. And one of the polarizing things about Age of Sigmar, where many people have, including me, have felt it was a positive, but a lot of the people who either left the game or didn't jump on board with Age of Sigmar, felt it was a major problem, was a lack of structure, where many people who have bought in, and certainly the early adopters playing Age of Sigmar, felt that the free-form way to pick your army was pretty much that, a way to play what you wish, to mix and match as you wish, to not just to try to take just the elite troops, but to take themes or cross factions. I never did the real cross faction thing myself, but I've seen plenty of people do it. But the idea of having less inhibition to your choices, the ability for instance, even when I brought my son in to buy the stuff for his army, to just pick a big monster or a huge unit of cavalry or a big character, and that be either the cornerstone of your army or even your army, and just that. If you just wanted to play a flight of dragons, that's what you wanted. And the idea, and it was a big departure from all the old methods of army construction in Warhammer Fantasy, where you didn't have a Cortex. Now, some people really, again, feel that the Cortex was a positive thing. I thought it was a negative, both in terms of being able to build your army. Although it did have merit, it allowed for some semblance of balance, if balance is what you're achieving, because you had to buy in with a certain minimum unit of amounts of, not typically they're the crappy units, but a foundation of what that army was going to be about before you could start padding it with additional things. You're not going to bring just cannons to a battlefield, whether it's historical or even in fantasy. It just doesn't seem to make sense to me. But that idea sometimes didn't translate across all, it was pervasive across all army lists in previous editions, but I never felt that it was rightfully justified in all cases. In some cases, certainly, whether you were looking at things logically, whether you were trying to look at just ways to make the game more balanced for a balanced type of play. Even though I'm not specifically rooted in the idea of having to have a balanced method of play, which is why I liked how Age of Sigmar started. Of course, that seems to be changing, but the idea. Really, it was just a staple of how you played all the Warhammer Fantasy editions from the initial incarnation all the way up to 8th edition. And losing that in Age of Sigmar it had a real big effect on the people that were coming into play and the people that had left. You could have 5 giants, and I love that you could. Do you really need to have a unit of snotlings, or a unit of of standard orc boys, or or whatever it is, in order to do that, or ogre brutes? You really shouldn't have to. What if I wanted to have a themed army of all giants, or if somebody wanted to have a flight of dragons, and maybe you had some extra stuff added in there because you needed a wizard, or you needed some other, whatever the standard, whatever the story of why you picked what you picked. If little Timmy wanted to walk into the game store and decided to pick 3 kits, and those 3 kits were not core units in the old version of the game, you couldn't do it, because the store manager would come up and say, "That's great, I'll ring you up, but in order, if you really want to play a game, you're going to need this unit and that unit and this unit." And then $300 or $400 or $500 later, you may have enough. Even then, maybe you have enough to actually put on the table for a standard 1,500 to 2,500 point game. Again, for the previous edition style. That was what the Cortex was. You needed those standard rank and file troops that were the staple of that entire list. Age of Sigmar doesn't have specific armies. It has keywords, which is what binds the armies together for synergies. It has keywords that people used to connect them to factions and sub-factions. They would have impacts on spells. They'd have impacts on command abilities. They have impacts on any standard abilities that only apply to the units that had those keywords. But they really didn't have anything that force bound you when you were creating your list, whether you do it on the fly or you do it in advance, which is what seems like the General's Handbook for match play is going to require. Even with comp, that requires you to have a list, beforehand. People used keywords in a lot of ways to bind up, to make up their lists, because even with the guys who I work with, the Gamer Grunts, or even my own independent games events that I've run through Tremendous Damage, we stuck within the faction divide, and that their faction divide has keywords that dictate what units are what. So there is some measure of there are some avenues that you still adhere to, even with Age of Sigmar, even if they weren't completely imposed, they were there. And a lot of the detractors were saying, "Hey, it's too Mod Podge, it's too crazy, it's too unbound," which is one of the criticisms for 40K when they went that way. But what a lot of the feedback I've gotten from the 40K people, and people who know, I mean, I haven't played 40K in a couple of decades. The bottom line is that people who have played in that environment have said, yeah, the Unbound thing was this and that, but it really never transpired, because the imposition of having to build within certain guidelines, especially in competitive play, is what was the norm, as opposed to just, hey, you can pick whatever you want. So I really think that we're going to be going down in that direction. So before I go further into that, let me just explain what this is. I'm 15 to 20 minutes in, and I haven't even read this, and I'm sure you've read this if it's on the screen, since it's on the screen static. But it's not really well worded, but it is GW, so we shouldn't be surprised that it can be a little vague or open to interpretation. And I'm sure all the the rules lawyers and nitpickers out there in the on the net will also try to analyze every comma, period, and exclamation point. But let's read this. This is Muster for War. This is one of the elements that's going to be included in the General's Handbook. And again, this is for match play. This is an important thing. This is not going to be part of the campaign narrative. It's not going to be part of open play, which is basically, the way Age of Sigmar launched. This is for match play, which is tournament style play. And it says, A Tale of Gamers. So what's a Battline unit? We're glad you asked. This is something from the upcoming General's Handbook. Our gamers are building a force that they can use in any style of game, and when playing the more competitive matched play format, your army must include a minimum number of Battline units, depending on the size of the game. We'll have more on how this works and the other types of units soon. The Crypt Flayers and Brutes are actually not Battline units unless the whole force has the Flesh Eater Courts and Iron Jaws keywords respectively. But this is what both generals plan to do. This is one of the advantages of match play. In match play, of sticking within a single themed force. And that last paragraph is what is a little awkward in terms of how they worded it. They could have been a little clearer about what they were meaning, at least from the way I read it. But the way I understand it is there will be units that there are unit types that are considered battleline units, basically core type units that need to be included in order for you to to build your list in a matched play environment. But it seems that you only need it if you're not in a themed army. So if you have a themed army, let's say, for instance, all flesh eater courts, or or whatever that keyword is. Maybe it's all dispossessed for the dwarves, or something along those lines. It seems like you can bypass that. If you have a mix and matched unit, several units from different keywords or different sub-factions, you then have to have an auto-include of battleline listed units, which would probably be a lot of the core type units that we've seen before. But the elite units like the Crypt Flayers and the Brutes, very obviously listed here as the new War Scrolls, and sometimes new kits like the Brutes, which are are going to be tougher, obviously more expensive, and probably things you don't have if you have more of a legacy army, even if you've converted it over with rounds. It seems to make sense that a lot of the older units that you may already have a lot of will probably be those. It depends. It really depends on. We're gonna have to see. We have to wait and see until this comes out. Now, I have two minds about this. I have several minds actually about this. One is that it's a little bit of a throwback to the Cortex, but at least it gives you a choice. I like the idea of kind of pushing people towards themed armies. There's already a push because of the synergies that really you're silly if you're not trying to create a themed army. But what if you want to have a mixed and matched army? What if you want to have an army of flesh eater courts and vampire count type units? What if you want to mix the Tomb King units, which are still playable even though they're not being produced anymore? They're still totally playable, and they're very viable in Age of Sigmar. They just, again, I can't stress enough, they just were discontinued as far as production. They're not out of the game. They're not retired. They're not illegal in play. And they certainly will be legal in match play. The GW has made that point. Same thing with the Bretonnians. But what if you wanted to have Tomb Kings alongside of the standard death units? You would then have to apparently have a minimum number, depending on how big the game is, of these battle line units included in your force. So that is kind of a Cortex. Now, a lot of people will say, but you don't need to do it. It's an option. Well, not true, really. It is, whatever your viewpoint on whether this is a good or bad thing for the game. I do think part of it is certainly financial and fiscal. GW is not foolish. They want you to buy more stuff, and they want you to have more things, so that if you have more options, you got to buy more things and have it available for you to use. But in this case, match play is only one of three different versions. Let's be realistic, guys. Match play, even if you're not playing in a tournament, if you're just doing a pickup game, it's going to be one of the most commonly played form of Age of Sigmar, in the same way as tournament style was the default method of playing 99% of the time. In most cases, obviously, it depends on your local, your local group, your personal, play group, even your local store. But I play across many different stores. I played for quite several decades, many different game systems, and you can make an argument all you want about how this game does it this way, or in your area it does it that way, and your club did it this way. Let's be realistic, guys. The vast majority of play, the easiest, the most default way that people are going to play is going to be mirroring this match play system. It's going to be just like it was before. So whatever is in this player's handbook, this general's handbook, for the most part, you could probably just rip out the section for match play and easily just look at that and not even look at the other stuff, except for those rare or fewer cases where those types of play, the open style free form that we know now in Age of Sigmar, and the narrative campaign structure, those are going to be far, far fewer in terms of play across the board. Match play is what I'm sure. And I lament about that. I'm not really happy about that, but I bought into it. And I've enjoyed playing that style for many years. I'm just missing the idea that the freedom of Age of Sigmar is going to be lost. But look, there's positives. I've said it many a time. The idea that we're going to have this general's handbook with various different forms of play that you can pick and choose for your style is a good thing, and if it brings more people in to have more of a structured, competitive type of a gameplay, that where people want some semblance of balance, some semblance of structure and how your army is built, so that one person isn't bringing their entire collection and you're just bringing your starter box to a game. Again, if that means that the community grows and it helps support more, brings in more business for GW, and it means we get more kits and more armies and more models and more books, and more, and that's all a positive thing. You can't say that that's negative. So if we're giving up a little bit of what Age of Sigmar looked like for those who like that at launch and for this first year of Bliss, well, it's not such a big loss when you consider the upside. So I just want to make sure I make that clear, that I'm not shitting on this. This is not all downside, and it's not a complete reversal. The core tax system, the Battline unit system, is an option. You still can build your Mod Podge army list in competitive play according to the way they see it, but you will have to adhere to it if you don't have a themed army. Now, with that themed situation, there is some imbalance, and we all have talked about this in the past. Some themes, some lists, some keywords are not as well fleshed out as others. A lot of the elves, for instance, the elves had been broken up where some of their themes, some of their keyword subfactions were really kind of put together in a strange way that a lot of us were boggled about. But even so, even if they make sense to you, they just weren't well fleshed out. And there were some cases where there wasn't even a general that you could pick, or they wouldn't have even a wizard option. And you'd have to cross over, at least the way I'm reading this, into other factions, even under the whole elf or order or whatever scenario, in order to be able to make even a remotely viable list. So unless we see coming down the road further releases that will help flesh out those sub-factions, they may all still not be viable. They may be the kind of thing that you could only include in a non-themed list that will force you to, in a matched play environment, in a competitive tournament style play for Age of Sigmar, to have to include your core tax, your Battline units. So while you may look at it from the standpoint whether you like this concept, as just what it means, whether you like it or not, the fact is that what you're playing now and what you pick and whether or not you want to incorporate those units into a tournament situation is going to have some advantages and disadvantages. The more options, the more fleshed out that sub-faction or that faction in total is, the more options you're going to have for variety of play, for depth of list selection, of unit selection. These are really important things to understand and consider. So we can't make a judgment yet until we see what the Battleline units really are and what are considered Battleline units until this book comes out. And for some of the stores, they're going to get it in a couple weeks because they're going to have the early introduction to get people who are on board ready to go. I'm not sure if that means it's if the players are necessarily able to get it. I'm going to probably get it early, or at least get an option to check it out and do a review on it. But that way people can start building up their stuff and painting up their stuff for when this the summer campaign actually starts. But either way, it's not going to be a completely even situation if this is how it appears. It's gonna wind up. So I think we're going to have to wait and see before we make a cast any final judgment. I don't think it's certainly don't panic. I don't think that it's time to lament. I do think it's a double-edged sword, but it's hard to tell until we really see it on paper and then analyze it and chew it up and spit it out, which is what all of us, who have YouTube channels do, and all you guys who are viewers who give us feedback have. Now, I'm just going to leave this off here again. I mean, I don't say it a lot, but I'm sure there's a lot of contention with people that have either returned to the fold, who left in a huff, or people who are just still infuriated and raging about Age of Sigmar in general because it's still not what they loved, which was 8th edition, or people who've gone off to play other games and be grown-ups here, people. I know we're playing a childish game here. We're playing with little plastic toys, but if you're going to comment, please let's keep it level-headed and reasonable and respectful. But you can feel free to discuss, feel free to disagree with me. That's fine. I have a spectrum of thoughts and ideas on why this is good and why this is maybe of concern. But either way, it's what we have, and I'm sure that look, if we all love playing these games, we're just going to find a way to make it fun. And if it's not, you'll move on to something else. I certainly will be playing this and playing plenty of matched play, and hopefully a lot of the other different formats. But we'll have to see what it is. If you haven't got any input, please feel free to put it into the channel, and look me up on Twitter, on all the different formats that I have put out. Also, I've got a lot of other stuff that's coming up. I'm going to throw this out there. If you've got questions, I'm going to do a Q&A video. I know a lot of people do it. I've really kind of avoided it, but a lot of people give me questions on my various videos, and I can't always keep track. If you've got questions about this or anything else, Age of Sigmar related, or any of the other games that I play, please feel free to put them out there, and I'll go through a Q&A video at some point in the next week or so. I am going to be thin as far as the amount of content that I'm going to be providing over the next week or so, just because my son is going to be away just before the July 4th U.S. holiday. And, after that, I'll be kind of free and clear for most of the summer, where I'll probably be putting out a ton of content, doing a ton of painting, and playing a ton of games. In addition to spending a ton of time in between that with my wife, where we can actually be just a couple again. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. Have a great day, everybody.